Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford.
And I'm Dalton Gentry.
And we're here for part 4 of a 6-part series as we trek along through
A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Because why not? Why not have a little bit of masochism in the channel here? So this is chapter 4, and a shorter chapter this time around at least. At least this was a doable sit-down-to-read chapter. Let's break it down a little bit here. Basically, Stephen, at this point, has gone full monk. He now devotes every bit of his energy, all the fiber of his being to the church. He goes as far as to deprive himself of any kind of worldly pleasures. And basically, he is living for the church. That is his sole purpose. He's depriving his body for his soul.
that is known as asceticism.
Asceticism. Look at you. And this goes so far until he has basically offered a shot at the priesthood, which, ironically enough, sends him running the other direction. That's not what he wants. No, that sounds terrible now that I think about it. So we kind of flash forward a little bit. Stephen is deciding he's going to go to college. We get a good Daedalus imagery thing going on here with the Hawkman in the sky. And then he drifts off into a peaceful sleep after seeing a woman on the beach, and we are back to where we started. This whole thing just kind of runs in circles.
But that's the struggle, is it not?
It is, and I don't know where I'm at with this book right now. I wanted more from it so far, and I don't know how Joyce is going to just change this in one chapter for me. Yeah.
Okay. Explain where you are with it.
So we have seen both ends of the spectrum. We had Stephen as a child, growing up and moving into this life of sin. It's a life of overindulgence, any sin of the flesh he wants, just doing whatever he wants. And that was kind of coupled with a crippling remorse towards the church. And then we get Stephen just full-on monk, only living for his soul, this asceticism, as you put it, and kind of, not even in the beginning, it's 100%. This is it for Stephen, this is what he's doing. And then we get the tempting of the fates coming back in where he thinks there might be more, and it seems like he's just back and forth. It's back and forth, it's back and forth, and I feel like we're just reading the same chapter over and over and over, which, I agree with you, from a writerly perspective, it's kind of where you have to be. He's trying to find himself. He's just going to such extremes to do so.
Yeah, so that's the part that is recurring. So you've got the extremes of things, but what we've got is we're through chapter 4, right?
Correct.
We have Stephen as a child, and Stephen as a child was good at school, but also bullied.
Okay.
Then you've got Stephen a little bit older, who starts to come into his own through his dedication, but is also a little bit ostracized with family.
Okay.
Then you've got Stephen as the sinner, right?
Okay.
Who has this horrible rejection of the self afterwards.
And then Stephen as the saint.
Stephen is the saint who, towards the end of this chapter, falls back into lust with a woman, doesn't he?
He does.
And all was almost for naught, right?
Okay.
Because he almost got those feelings. But he got those feelings.
Okay.
So we have gone to the place where we are even denying the things that have occurred. That is a very lustful scene, is it not?
It is, it is.
And he's denying that it ever happened because all of his work that has been put in has been to get rid of those feelings.
To the extreme.
To the extreme.
Won't even look at people when he walks down the street.
And even then, when offered the ability to wear the gowns of priesthood, decides, I really don't think so.
Yeah.
Right? So the recurring theme, really, the only thing that's recurring is this jostling from one extreme to the other.
True.
The religious to the individuality and sinful nature, to the extreme religious to extreme individuality and sinful nature. That is what is recurring. But it seems to be, so all of the drama that we get through this thing, we get on a social level as well as the personal level.
Okay.
So, for example, when he was starving, I think it was the beginning of chapter 3, that went along with him denying himself sexual interest, didn't it? And here, we get this extreme torture of the body for good of the soul. And it's coinciding with Stephen torturing himself mentally and anguishing over his lust.
Okay. It's hard to explain. Like, we were talking briefly before we turned the camera on. I say, forget it, we'll just talk about it on camera. I don't know what I wanted from this text, and I don't know if it's delivering what I want. I can't argue the quality. There's a lot of good stuff going on here, a lot of great literary work going on here. No argument for that. But as far as what I was wanting out of this, I'm not sure where the hell we're even going with it. We have one chapter to conclude this for me, to tie this all together, and for Stephen to find, I assume, a balance. I get behind that. I can dig that. This is a kind of a search for Zen in Stephen, trying to find his balance in this world of torturing himself and living for the soul and living for the flesh. Which one's going to better develop the artist? But we've yet to see that artist blossom, and I think that's what I was hoping was going to be in this text. Maybe that's coming. Maybe that's going to be the next chapter for me, but so far, I don't know. I'm at a bit of a loss with it.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. It is certainly not a text which is on the nose.
No.
Right? You've got to dig with this. You've got to search for it. And you have to definitely bring yourself to terms as much with the things that are going on as you're hoping the protagonist does. Mm-hmm. Right? So for me, a lot of this, at this stage in my life, seems completely superfluous.
Okay. Because
I'm an atheist. So, you want to spend the night with some hookers, man, go at it,
Fun.
But it's I think that it would be foolish to completely write off the fact that to the character in this novel, the supernatural realm is very real.
It is.
And is very present.
It is. And if in taking it from the character's perspective, that is a huge deal. I mean, this is your everlasting soul that we're dealing with here. So at what point do we find that balance? Where can I be this good, God-fearing Christian man who is going to get into heaven and is doing right by sin? And where can I still do what I enjoy myself, develop as an artist, feel love, feel passion? Where is that balance? And like I said, I'm not arguing there's not great stuff going on here. I think the whole part bringing Daedalus back into this was wonderful. And I think that's where we're going with this. Stephen's going to fly too close to the sun. He's going into the sun. I think that's where this is going to go because we keep getting that reoccurring image. For God's sake, it's in his name. But I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about this just yet. A lot of questions being asked. And I know I mentioned it previously in a couple of the earlier weeks, but we both have a copy of a book called How to Read Literature by a Professor. Like a Professor. I believe it is by Thomas More.
I think you're right.
Might be right on that. And at the end, he has further readings. What you should be reading if you're wanting to examine this, which is a really nice little text at the end. And then he has a very, very short masterclass, which you shouldn't even attempt until you're ready, and Portrait of the Artist is on that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff buried in here. I'm just not sure if the novel as a novel is executing for me right now.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure it does. It would be possibly unwise to make that argument in the positive assertion that it is not working for you, because I think that in a lot of ways this is certainly one of those texts that if you say it sucks, it says more about you than the text.
Okay.
Right? This is one of those times where, is it a Mark Twain quote that if you think you're an idiot, if you think you might be an idiot, it's better to keep your mouth shut and keep the doubt than to open your mouth and just prove yourself right.
Okay.
Something like that.
Well, I think there's plenty to talk about. There's plenty to examine. There's a lot we can get into with the review. I just don't care for it right now.
Yeah.
And maybe, like you said, it does seem superfluous. It doesn't seem to be clicking. This whole idea of, being a God-fearing man and, like, killing myself to do so, it seems silly to me.
Have you never been that way for anything, though?
Not really, no. I don't get committed and excited to anything.
I know. So, the one thing that is interesting to me is that I believe Nietzsche, when he was a young man, went through something similar. And I believe Einstein, when he was a young man, was dedicated to God for a few years and was devoutly religious. And this when he was younger than a young man. He was a boy, I think, when he went through it. But it is something that is a recurring... You never struggled with this at all?
No.
With anything like this?
No!
Yeah, I think that there is something that is putting yourself through the fire like Stephen is doing, I think is something that is purifying. And it is from this thrust that we get the great metaphors that we get. This is one of the things that Jordan Peterson often argues for, which no one's really even sure if Jordan Peterson's actually a Christian, because he will never answer the question. But these are the magisterial substrate level of metaphor for our society. There is something to putting oneself through the fire and hardening the steel of the soul, pounding that steel of the soul into submission, folding it over itself, that is very edifying towards life itself. And when one puts his or herself through things like that, it makes you a better and more thorough person. Now, it is questionable at best whether or not those thrusts need to be in the religious sense, but there seems to be very few outlets for an extremely ambitious young person to put oneself through that fire, not in the name of a religion.
Okay.
Right? So if you were to treat yourself in the way that Stephen is treating himself in this text as a 15, 16-year-old, but it was, you were staying up all hours making movies, would your parents have supported you? Yours might have, right?
Yeah, mine
you've got that
but
support.
I get what you're saying.
Right. Most people would say, why are you
doing this?
Why are you doing this? Why are you wasting your time?
And I think
But when you do that for God, it is readily accepted. Even though the mother seems to have questions, seems to have pause about the idea, Father jumps on it readily, does he not?
Mm-hmm. And I think the best way to sum this up is looking at this, from my perspective, would be the complete opposite of Stephen's. I'm very, very comfortable in my terrible life. That's fine. The idea of faith is fucking horrifying to me. Because really, religion comes down to one thing, and it's faith. You either have it, or you do not.
Right.
Stephen clearly has a faith. And that faith is what's driving him. What terrifies me is some people, for some fucking reason, wake up one day and have that faith. Out of nowhere, they find God, and they become Stephen of chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 4. I can't tell you. In 10 years from now, will I believe in God? I don't think so. But if that faith sickness hits you, what do you fucking do about it? And then do you dedicate your life like this? So I think it's kind of looking at it like from an opposite perspective, but really that's the best way I can kind of wrap myself around this right now, because this whole fucking thing seems silly to me. Stephen destroying himself for the idea of God. And given, again, the time frame, the options he had, his faith, I understand where he's going with this, but I don't know. He's so back and forth, his faith seems to be what's in question here. That seems to be really the point that I'm getting from this. He believes in God, but to what degree must he give sacrifice in order to reach this level of faith that will allow him to live a good life? All the while, his family's suffering throughout the entirety of this novel. I mean, at one point, I think he says a house smelled like rotten food. And obviously, they've been moving around a lot. They're on hard times. Stephen's still going to school, maybe. Stephen's going to college now. He might be a priest. That costs money. So the family is obviously sacrificing for Stephen's betterment. And I don't think he's made that connection yet. So maybe that's where he's going to find his balance, is coming from, hey, I'm taking so much for me. Maybe that's what I've got to ease back on. Maybe that's how I find my path in this. I don't fucking know. A lot going on with this.
Yeah, it's definitely... So it's a very full text.
Yes.
It's a very rich text. And it's a very well-written text. You're going through these things with Stephen. I'm still questioning where your apprehensions lie.
Yeah?
Yeah. So, is it not possible to find a protagonist's journey completely superfluous while still granting the story worth telling?
I'm not saying it's not a story worth telling. I'm just saying I feel like we've fallen into a pattern of just constantly repeating ourselves. We had Stephen growing up, and Stephen was in the faith, but, he was just kind of on the outskirts. He was a young man. And then he found himself, and he kind of went off on his own path, and he went on the darker side of things. Sinned a little bit, lived a little bit, got hit with guilt and regret, turned back to the faith, where he just completely enthralled himself in faith. Well, that didn't work. And then just out of nowhere, when it's like, this is your answer, here is your opportunity, he's like, well, let me see what the other side's got to offer.
How are you coming to the conclusion that delving into the faith didn't work?
Well, he's obviously having regrets now, because when they offered him the idea of the priesthood, as soon as they say priesthood, he is living his life at this point, a 100% dedicated man. Every day, every second of his day, he is dedicating to God. Torturing himself, pushing against all of his human emotions for God. Yeah. And the minute they say, here is your opportunity to best serve God, here is a chance at the priesthood, what you're striving for, quite honestly, he's just like, maybe not.
I don't think that's what happens.
That's what it feels like.
How is that what it feels like?
They offer him this opportunity, and he basically just, and he kind of goes on his little walk.
No, it's not something to be taken lightly, correct?
It's not. I understand that. You're dedicating your life.
Especially if you are God-fearing.
If you're a man of the faith, this is it. It's a big decision.
So they give him the option, and he says, I will think on it, I'll pray on it, and the priest says,
tomorrow's sermon will be for you.
I pray that this is when God will show himself to you.
Okay.
So Stephen is gone, and he's spending time alone to introspect, right? But he's alone among others. And it is during this time that he finds himself not wanting to be a priest. He says, in passing, I decided against it. Had I decided against it? I suppose I had. He didn't even know he made the decision, because it was not a forthright decision. It was a decision that came to him, which is very much a religious thing, right?
Okay, but again, in that passing feeling, this seems like something he is dedicating his life to, something he's passionate about, something he wishes to pursue. This is the way he's already living. This is the decisions he's made. And then all of a sudden he just, maybe it's not for me.
Well, but I think that there is definitely there is, in the religious sense, a calling. There has to be a calling, and you have to feel it. You have to be touched by God, and you would know so. If he does not feel that, it is in his best interest not to do this, right? But also, they are not simply the priests which run the which run the risk of eternal damnation, right? What he's doing is he's struggling very much against his sense of lust. He's struggling very much against his sex drive, which you don't get to turn off.
No.
Because of that, he is scared every moment of every day that he's going to fall back into this quote-unquote sinful nature of his. That is why he's dedicating his life to God and making such strict enunciations for himself. That is why he's doing those things, so that he does not suffer eternal damnation.
But in that argument, wouldn't the priesthood be the best option for him?
Not necessarily.
If he's struggling internally with this, he should put himself in an external environment that would hopefully completely deprive him. I mean, that's what he seems to be trying to do.
If you were struggling with the multiplication tables, should you become a high school math teacher?
Absolutely so.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
That's what you're saying there. I am not sure. So one of the things that was very striking in the wake of Mother Teresa's death was these letters that she had written to higher-ups in the church where she confessed, you know, I don't feel the presence of God.
Yeah.
I don't feel it. I don't understand what that even means. And they wrote back to her, that's good. You're suffering. You're going through some suffering. You're going through trial and testament. And so while and whereas it is a little bit more perhaps accepted for someone of the faith and of the cloth of the faith to go through trials and tribulations in that fashion, I do not know that it would be advisable for someone who knows that he's struggling with what Stephen knows he's struggling with, to then join the rank and order. Because am I mistaken in remembering that he did not even confess at his own church?
No, he felt too embarrassed, so
Right.
he had to go to a different church. There was even a point after he had decided not to join the priests where he was kind of humored by the idea of hearing other people's confessions.
Yes. Which goes back to that sadist type of nature.
I feel like next week we have to have a priest on the show with us. Do you think we could find a priest to discuss this with us?
To come here?
I live across the street from a Catholic church with a convent, and there's a priest who lives on site. I feel like we should just try and see, be like, hey, would you talk God with us?
I don't know. His feet might start burning upon entering the apartment.
That's fair. That's fair. I'd have to go to him. That's fine. But it's across the street, and I'll do it. But I don't know. I'm not arguing, again, the text. The text is good. The writing is good. There's quality throughout. I just don't know how Joyce is going to tie this all together and complete this for me in one chapter.
Is that a literary thing to do?
Possibly, yes. But the execution of the next chapter will make or break this book for me.
Okay.
That's the easiest way to put it.
Okay.
Anyway, now that we've talked for a good 24 minutes about my ramblings about God, anything else you want to say about this?
I think that's all that was going on here, really. This was a chapter in particular that I think you had to pay close attention to.
Okay.
But when you did, you felt the straining in the woodwork.
Okay.
Right? Hear
the boughs start to break.
Right. And everything's twisting and turning.
Okay.
And he is, as close as he is, and as far as he seems to be taking things, he still doesn't know if this is for him.
Fair.
I think that struggle tells us as much about this protagonist as does anything.
Again, highlighting the concept of Daedalus, bringing that back into the text again, this late in, it would be one's assumption that Stephen is going to go too far. That would be my assumption. He's going to go too far on one extreme or the other. I'm not sure, but that is what I'm going to be assuming is what is happening. However, since this is James Joyce, and this is considered one of the greatest texts ever written, I'm not sure what to expect. maybe something a little different. But it would be my assumption that he's going to go too far. I would like to say he's probably going to go too far on the sin side and discover something.
Well, what did Daedalus do?
Daedalus was the craftsman. Correct? He built the labyrinth, and was Daedalus the one who built the wings? In which his son's soul...
and flew too close to the sun.
Icarus,
yeah. The wings melted, came plummeting back to Earth. So the sun is fire. How would we interpret that?
How would we interpret that? If Daedalus is building the wings, is it his family that's going to fall into the fire since we have no sun to deal with? Well, or in this, is Daedalus himself going to be damned to hell? Stephen.
I think the latter is closer to what we're looking at. You're talking about the sun as fire, hell as fire, so you're flying too close to the sin. I think that's what's going on. And again, this is beyond my realm of comprehension with this book, my realm of memory with this book. I did not get this far the first time I read it.
So you don't know how it's ending either?
No idea.
Okay. Again, I think that next chapter, next week, is going to be really makes this or breaks this for me. Down to that, 100%.
100%?
Yeah.
The rest of this book has no merit for you?
It has merit, it has worth, but I'm not going to say I thoroughly enjoyed it. I could say, yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can get from Portrait of the Artist. I would suggest you reading it because it's good for you to read. You should definitely get this text in. But if somebody says, I would like to read something, I think it's just really, really great. I want some great novel. I'm not going to suggest this right now. Unless he can tie this together for me and complete it.
Even then, is there or is there not a certain type of person to which you absolutely cannot suggest this novel?
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of people you can suggest this novel to.
Not a certain type, I guess that's that's poorly worded. But there are certain people...
Certain type of reader.
Sure.
100%.
Sure. And there's people in your life that you look at and you can... This is one of those texts by which you can dice things.
Yeah.
You can look at someone and say, would not get through it, would get through it. Would not understand it, it's going to get something.
Years ago when my neighbor found out we were doing strip cover lit and what it was... she said, hey, can you recommend one good book for me? One book that I should just absolutely read. The one. So I gave her Gatsby. I said, this is the one. If you're going to read one damn good book, read this damn good book. And like 2 days later, she gave back. She's like, not me. Not for me. Yeah. Didn't read it.
Yeah.
No. So back to Nora Roberts it is. That's fine. That's fine.
Dalton, you're so judgmental.
I worked at a bookstore too long. I am allowed to talk shit on Nora Roberts, James Patterson, Debbie McComber, any of those.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
Anyway, do you have anything else to say?
I do not.
Close us out then.
This has been part 4 of a 6-part series as we journey through Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. We will be back next week for part 5 and the week after that for a review of the novel. If you like this sort of thing, maybe hit the like button, hit subscribe if you have not already. And if you would like to help us create more content here on Strip Cover Lit, there is a link, as always, to our Patreon to be found in the description below.